Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will start today's episode where we are welcoming back two special guests from our last episode, joining us for the fifth time on the ATA podcast show, Eva Bertilsson, and now for the second time, the wonderful Angelica Hesselius. Eva has a master's degree in behaviour analysis and a passion for everything related to behaviour, learning and animal welfare. Together with her business partner, Emily Johnson-Vey, Eva runs their collaboration Carpe Momentum, teaching seminars on the general principles of behaviour and learning, and coaching trainers in the art of structuring great training sessions, regardless of the venue or the species. Eva is a board member of the Swedish Association for Behaviour Analysis, a faculty member of Clicker Expo, and an enthusiastic disseminator of ethical practices based on behaviour science. In addition to her teaching, Eva has been instrumental in introducing Tag Teach and Fear Free in Scandinavia. Eva loves networking and connecting people and ideas, and she hosts the yearly CCC conference on choice, control and communication in her hometown on the west coast of Sweden. Angelica Hesselius is an internationally renowned reward-based horse trainer with a background as an instructor in classical dressage and academic art of riding. She specialises in positive reinforcement training for balanced movement in groundwork and riding, and she is developing proprioception, movement and communication through systematic reward-based strategies. She trains horses, teaches students and coaches colleagues all around the world. She's developed new strategies for creating high precision movements and low frustration from the get-go when working with food reinforcers. She's part of the Swedish instructor collaboration OHR+, and has been teaching dressage since 2010 and with a positive reinforcement approach since 2016. It is her passion to guide horses and riders towards higher balance and find connection and collection together with a horse that loves to train as much as you do. Her current projects include Exploring Nuances with Eva Bertilsson, with lectures and courses for horse trainers and behaviour geeks curious to explore and expand their training systems. In part one, we went on a journey, and we're super grateful to you, Angelica, for sharing about what we like to call your training odyssey. Moving forward, though, for part two, I'm excited to get into the weeds and discuss with you both more about your collaboration, what you two are working on as a relatively recently formed team who have been simultaneously exploring new concepts and teaching them at the same time. So I'm keen if you guys could share from this experience how the listeners of this show can benefit from your process and apply it to their own training. So how about we start with what you would call your process?
Oh my, how are we gonna describe our process, Angelica? This is a cool question because it sort of sends us back to what have we been doing for the past year and a half? Not only like the topics we've been discussing, but also what behaviors have we been engaging in that ended up being something that you could call collaborations and explorations.
I think it goes back a bit from what we talked about on the last podcast as well, how we process things during actually working with the student at the same time. So I think that has been, we did a lot of talk between ourselves also during the summer, but when we got the structure going was actually also during the teaching process. Would you agree here?
Yeah, I would say so. It's like it started with us just talking about whatever was on our minds. So when you had something that was, I remember words that you were saying early on had to do with, what words did you use? Like fine-tuning, dimming. You had the word dimmer in your vocabulary, and you were talking about, oh, I have these things I'm thinking about a lot, about how how queuing systems is like dimmers. It's not on and off. It's not queue, no queue. It's like dimmer systems with queues and dimmer systems for behaviors. And then we sort of dove into what did you, I was curious what you were looking at when you said those, that occasioned those words from you. And I think that's something we've been doing over and over and over again. Like one of us has a concept in mind or an idea or a thought in mind, and the other one keeps asking questions like, what does that look like? What do you mean? And then as soon as we come to the stage of, oh, here is something that we're ready to begin sharing with somebody else, we didn't finish anything. We were like, oh, we find this interesting. Probably other people will find it interesting too. Maybe some other people want to be part of us discussing this. And then we just went online and did the discussion.
Yeah, but I think we discussed words, actual words, which I find maybe also teaching this in English. We are both non-native English speaker, as I'm sure you're hearing, but to actually discuss the meaning of the word themselves was actually a bit more important, maybe because of that. I think we stopped at so many words and tried to unpack them in a higher sense that what I'm doing in Swedish, for me at least.
Like just the word of continuous feeding, to take one of, well, it's just a horse nonstop eating. How hard can it be? Why do we need to define it? But if you say, oh, I did this behavior and we used a continuous feeding technique, if I haven't seen the training, which oftentimes I hadn't, I would go, oh, what does that look like? Exactly what is it that you're doing? And then if we have that discussion in Swedish, kontinuerligt matande, and then we go, oh, now we're going to talk about this in English. Does it make sense to use the closest equivalent of the word? How will people understand? Can we use our words in a meaningful way to explain the concept? And what images do we want people to get? What feel in their hands do we want people to get from this concept? What discrimination do we want people to make between, oh, is this what you guys talk about as continuous feeding? Or is this that I see this person doing with this horse? Is that maybe something else?
Also, we were teaching a course, a mutual course for dogs and horses, a multi-species course in Vienna. That was last autumn, I think. And we went there.
October?
Yeah, exactly. We went there a bit early and just played around with the horses as well. But that part of that time, or maybe I mixed it up because we were there twice. But anyway, part of what we were doing there was me working with the horses and Eva continuously asking me questions about me verbalizing my training, basically what I'm doing with my hands. I have a lot of trained behavior with my hands. I have decent mechanics, but I can't always verbalize what I'm doing. But Eva helped me a lot with unpacking what my body is doing as well. So I think that I said organic last podcast, I think, and I think it was for me a really, really organic way of exploring my own training with your lens on it.
Yeah, and that's also became part of exploring and developing and teaching at the same time, because as soon as, I think we should do this with ourselves as well, but it becomes even more obvious when we're developing something together with somebody else, that we need to make sure that we are thinking about the same thing. If we're going to convey it to somebody else, then first you and I need to make reasonably sure that we're talking about the same thing or looking at the same thing or understanding from reasonably the same perspective. And we use words and demos and watching together to accomplish that. And that becomes it's like we're teaching ourselves and each other's at the same time.
And that's teachers.
It's not just teaching somebody else. It's like teaching myself and you.
And as teachers, we have very different dialects when we address our students as well, which I thought was...
Oh my God, yes, that is cool.
so very interesting. And I think that became clearer and clearer that we were working very different with our students. And that was also a very interesting part of the process. And I think, at least from the feedback we have gotten when we work together, that is actually one of our strengths, that we worked really different with communicating with our students.
Yeah,
and you,
because that means that
yeah.
I guess that's part of what makes it interesting for me too, working together with you, is that you and I are not describing things in the same way or thinking in the same way necessarily. So there is a lot to explore all the time, because I can't just watch a training session with you or listen to you talk about something and instantly get the image or get the understanding or be able to copy what you're doing. I need to ask 1,000 questions in order to make what I see or what I hear integrate with me. And I'm guessing vice versa.
Yes, totally. And I think diving deep in that sense is really what we both a bit are looking for, in at least in our collaboration.
Yeah. And I think a huge part of this is also, if I'm thinking from the perspective of Ryan's question here, what might listeners of this show take away? One part of it is that we never had the idea that there was, this is the right or wrong way, this is the better or worse way, not with thinking, not with words, not with actions. It was very much about, I wonder if I even understand what you're doing and how that comes together in the system of yours, and which parts are connected, which parts are independent. Are there parts that I personally wouldn't do? There might be some parts that I would do differently, but mostly it's just there's so many different possible ways of doing things. And if I can develop a thorough understanding of the decision making that you are doing and bring in my own thoughts without them being, hey, I think it should be this way. It's more just adding layers of thoughts or ideas. So together we end up doing a lot more than what one of us, the product ends up being a lot larger if it isn't a discussion of it should be this or that. That would have been totally uninteresting for both of us.
What people can benefit from this is you've used the word today, and we've obviously recorded a podcast previous to this, and us three have known each other for a long time, and you've done some content for our Animal Training Academy membership before. So that's in the membership, only accessible to members. But one word that you used a lot in these collaborations that you've done with Animal Training Academy so far is the word organic. Like, this was an organic process. And Eva, you said that this is a process you can do with yourself. So when you think about collaboration, and we think about you guys coming together, and does collaboration look like going, well, what does this collaboration look like? Well, you asking, what does that look like? And having these conversations, can people do this with themselves? Can people do this with each other? Or is this an example of two curious people coming together and the curiosity allowing that to organically happen? Like, what foundations are required for people to do this for themselves? Because I think it's not something that everyone naturally has, curiosity, in terms of frustration, in terms of uncertainty, in terms of seeing something they might not like. You say it's organic. But for the listeners of the show who want to do this themselves, what is doing? So a couple of questions in here. What does doing it themselves look like, and what foundations are required for someone to be able to leverage what you guys have been talking about? Does that question make sense?
Totally. For me, Eva kind of said it, well, a minute ago or something like that, to view the behavior as not the behavior. And I mean, what we have been teaching together now mainly has been about feeding horses in different ways, non-stop feeding, either from the environment or from our hands, and creating movement within that feeding. So maybe that's important information to have. That's what we've been exploring also. And we've been sort of exploring movements that create certain positions and certain, what we said, attitude last podcast. And I think we wanted to create certain attitudes as well. Eva, you can rephrase that better. But to view the outcome of what we worked with together with the horse as not right and wrong, not better or worse, just as information, I think that is something we all can be better at, and we can practice this. Doesn't matter if maybe we need, I don't think we even need curiosity in this sense to be able to be good at it. I think we actually just need to be okay with change and not value it in a certain way. Eva, take over.
Mm-hmm. I'm just like listening and enjoying the sounds that come into my ears. It is like music. Seriously, Angelica, that was beautiful. No, I 100% agree. There is something in the direct interaction in the training. If I am working with with a horse in front of me or a learner in front of me, and then I just look at what happens and go, oh, so if my hand goes a little bit to the right and my body's over here, then that leg seems to move. Interesting. Not, oh no, that leg moved, or oh no, that leg didn't move. It's more like connecting, oh, under these conditions, that seems to happen. And that comes with the idea that we're constantly experimenting, and like for me, the fundamentals of what behavior analysis is all about is just watching what happens, and whether we label it curiosity or not. I think you're right on the money there with saying it's mostly about just being okay with what is what is, and be okay with change, and be okay with, oh, under these conditions, this is what happens. And then to dare to stop and take a look at it. We don't have to rush away from it. We don't have to rush forward and, oh, I've got to do this, I got to do that. What I think we're pretty good at doing, and might be something to encourage others to explore, is to just sort of stop and see, what was I actually doing?
Yeah, and I think something that can make this process, maybe is not the right word, but that can make this easier is if you give students or humans something to hang a closet to put your clothes in. And with this, I mean, for me, it's giving my horse a treat from my hand and wanting to create certain movements. If you have some experience from horses, it's easy for me to explain what I'm doing with my hands when I'm giving my horse a treat. It's equivalent to the connection, the contact between the rider and the horse when I'm sitting on a horse and riding, or the connection via the reins to the horse's head. That two-way communication that I want to create, that's the same for me that I want to create with giving my horse a treat and feeding in movement, for example. I want to create walk forward. I want to create shoulder in. I can tilt my hand in. If you give out known stuff for people to use and connect the dots a bit, however the dots that works for them, then I think it's easier to be okay with what is.
Yes, and that's something that you and I have been doing quite a lot, because if I show something or say something, you will ask questions to connect it well into what is well known for you, or I will have an idea of, oh, I can explain it in a way that makes sense to Angelica through giving a horse example or a riding example. So it's both like as the sender of some kind of information. If I can help through using words or demos or related examples, or saying, oh, this is an equivalent for that, to sort of connect it to something that my communication partner is more familiar with, that will help. But also as a receiver, we can do that in just bouncing it back. Oh, so and I've done that with you in this a million times. I think you show me something with a hand and I remember something you said earlier, and then I will ask you the question, oh, so do I remember this correctly, that when your horse is eating from your hand and is eating nonstop and you are walking, the horse is sort of just touching the hand and there is a sensory back and forth, sort of similar to what I remember from the light touch in the reins when riding a long time ago. Did I get that right? So sort of doing those bounces back and forth.
Yeah, and I think
to the known.
I mean, what we are actually doing now is giving ourselves, our students, whoever listens, a direction in which to go, which helps with the attitude, which really makes a sense of direction in this, because I also think that's the part of the frustration in all learners. When we don't have a sense of direction, we get uncomfortable and frustrated.
So this all sounds fun. It sounds very behavioral, analytical to me. Asking the questions, what does that look like? Would that be a fair interpretation of what you guys are sharing?
Yeah, I'd say so. For me, this is very much at the core of my thinking, whether it is the core of my thinking and I think it's behavior analytic, or if it's the core of behavior analytic thinking and that's how I like to think. I wouldn't know. But yes.
But I must say, your skills, your mechanics, your body awareness, and of course, your other teaching when you teach humans, I mean, that's a clean way of teaching also. And I think that comes into play, at least when you teach, because you use a lot less words than I do, and you have a bit of a different strategy when you teach also. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I find it interesting at least.
Well, I'm interested because you just highlighted some differences in your teaching styles there, and you mentioned that was an important part of what you guys are doing together now, and the benefit that your students can get from learning from you guys as a collaboration. What other things? Is that the difference, or are there other differences in your teaching style? How do you guys both teach?
How do I teach, Eva?
Yeah, maybe you can answer that for each other. That's a good idea.
When I have seen you together with students and horses, it has often been through you guiding the process as it happens. So sometimes guiding with words, sometimes guiding physically through your movement, sometimes through both. But oftentimes you helping the student work with the horse based on what's happening moment to moment. I would say that's my briefest summary of what I've seen many times when you have been out with a horse and a human. I totally agree. And I often describe, I'm there for the student. If the student needs me, I'm there a lot of the time. Student can check back in. I'm going to describe what I'm seeing, because part of what I think is my most important job is to help my students with getting better observation skills by seeing the small nuances and details of the movement, which if I have nothing to say, I'm always describing movement that I see, either from the human or the horse. So it doesn't mean that you have to listen to me all the time, but I'm there. And I think that's kind of just happened. And I think that's a huge difference from when Eva teaches, because then we have the focus bubble and the student works more independently with her learner. And then you discuss and plan next. And for sure, of course, I plan in pauses and stuff like that, but you are much more silent and discuss afterwards. And focus bubble is very important for me too, but I would describe it very different from how you are describing it, I think.
What is a focus bubble?
So in my teaching or myself with my animal, that would be just me and my animal. So all my attention, like the stimulus control for my behavior, comes from the animal that's in front of me, and potentially from my own thinking. So if I'm like really in that bubble with my animal, nothing outside of us has any impact on my behavior. And that typically means that I will not hear what somebody else is saying, because I will be only cueing off the animal at that moment. And that for me is like one of many possible interactions that there can be between a student and an instructor. But it is definitely one that I value a lot, and that I want to have in my teaching repertoire, and that I use quite frequently. And I guess part of that is that's where I want and sort of need to be with when I am the trainer. I want to make sure that I, as a trainer, if I'm working with somebody else, can still have my moments when I know I will not need to pay attention to anything outside of my animal. I get very much drawn in with the animal in front of me, and I want to make sure that I can be there and not need to split my vision, so to speak. But I think that's a cool thing in our joint teachings, where we've been able to sort of ping pong back and forth between different session structures. It's not just session structure for the animal, but also different session structures for the trainer, because you can benefit. It's as always, it's not the right and the wrong. It's what is most useful for whom and in what situation. Because I definitely, if I'm the student, I want to have both you helping me with words and movements through and through as I work with the horse. And I want to be able to step into my bubble and just experiment with the horse on my own for a short bit of time, and then pop out of my bubble and check in with, okay, what did that look like? What did you see?
Yeah, and I often use targets for humans as well. Like, if they target my hand with a certain body part to help them with body position. I mean, overall touching people is kind of my thing when I teach also. So that, I mean, now when I teach so much online, that is for sure the part I miss most, because that's very helpful to awaken body parts.
Oh, I so agree. That and being able to give direction through where you stand. Like to stay on that focus bubble for students a bit longer. I mean, I can do that, and you will do that too, I think, through where we position ourselves. It's like, do I take a couple of steps back to increase the likelihood that the student is working sort of on their own and just focusing in on the animal? Or do I step closer, which will be more of a cue to check in with me, unless I have a structure where checking in with me only happens if we're on some kind of micro pause, because then I can be as close as I want without just being a distraction to them.
And I think what we also been teaching what we've been teaching when it comes to horses, and I mean, also, I mean, in the beginning, we started you discovering your husbandry and I discovering my dressage from our different lenses. But I think it goes for both our training styles. We're heavy on the mechanics. The mechanical skills as the human are very important for both of us to have a high fluence on and to create behavior from the mechanical skills of the human. I think that's partly also why it has been so easy for me to work with you, because you are really relying on your handling system. Is that the correct way of saying it? Would you describe it different?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like, mechanics are the details of our mechanics, what body part is moving when, and the handling system is like how the mechanics go together into some kind of underlying cueing system that is ever present. And I think there's so many similarities between the way that we work with cues and cueing systems and our bodies in relation to our learners.
And I think that's one of to look at the different species. I mean, it's a horse has 4 legs, a dog has 4 legs. Yeah, the horse has a lot longer neck and a bit different anatomy, but they're not that different. And I think it's to recognize my dressage in your husbandry has been also a huge thing for me. And I think we all can take that with us to start looking around. Even if you're very nerdy specialized in what you're doing, there's so much of what you're doing when you start looking for it in different species. Yeah.
And, that is really cool. That I mean, now during 2022 and like the winter and this year, we've been so much exploring rewards with horses and the nonstop feeding and all of that. But where we started was really movement in dressage, movement in husbandry. We worked with dogs and horses and reindeer, which is also the species that we had at that course at your place many, many years ago. We did a multi-species course going from one reward to the next with horse, dog, and reindeer. That was fun. But there is something really interesting, I think, that happened in this cross-section between the dressage movements and the movements in the husbandry training. that we had a sense, we had an idea that there is something here that we want to dig into. It sounds like we're thinking about similar dimmers and difficult to describe behaviors and sometimes complex contingencies. There seems to be some kind of similarities. And then we just kept looking and digging and training and watching other people train until we could figure out a little more, what was it that we had this sort of hunch or gut feeling about?
You've said dimmer a couple of times now. Can you please unpack that for us?
It's a good question, Angelica, because can we now, a year and a half later, can we unpack the dimmer? I haven't asked you that. I'm curious.
Well, yeah. And I really wanted to say, because I integrated so hard, it might be a word from Carolina. I'm not actually sure if it's my own word because it's so deeply integrated. So that's, must say that, because if it's... For me, it's the secondary, when I'm translating it to horse, the secondary aids in my horse training, that's the rein aids, my targets, all my targets are, I consider secondary aids, my leg aids, everything basically that is not my body language is my secondary aids when I'm speaking horse. That's the dimmers. What I use the secondary aids for is to dim, with a light or creating nuances of movement, because what I think is one of the differences that I often see how it's practiced, not with you, Eva, I must say, but often when I see dog people train their dogs, it's very often very low latency. The dog is like, when they're good trained, now we do the behavior and then the behavior is done. And when we want to dimmer it, we want to maybe not have the lowest latency in the word. We want the soft into the behavior. We want maybe a soft out, and we want to create like we would with a light. A much more nuanced behavior. And that's, for me, what the secondary aids are helping us with. And I mean, my hand targets... So
when you say secondary aids, that might be you have one cueing system telling the horse, move forward along this line along the fence. And then you can have an additional aid to that is saying, keep doing what you're already doing, but also move your hind end like this, or also move your front end a little bit like that.
Yeah, and
many body parts at the same time.
Yeah, maybe I should mention primary aid. What is that? That's everything that is my body language. If I sit on the horse, the scart connection is sort of my pelvis. But otherwise, it's how I move my body parts in relation to my other body parts. That would be my primary aids. And that's, of course, a high level of nuance, but my primary aids is the baseline. Then the secondary aids support that baseline. That's sort of how I see it in that.
So what behaviors do you get from your primary aids? Like how you sit and like the basics, how your body is sort of connected to the horse or to the space which you and your horse share. What does that tell the horse to do?
If it's me, then, I mean, my system that my shoulder should represent the horse's shoulder, no matter what I do, that's the baseline. And when I do changes from that means something to my horses. For example, just walking alongside the arena track or something like that, walking forward, my shoulders face forward, telling my horses, yeah, she just wants us to walk straight forward now. And when I do changes from this baseline position, for example, turning to the inside, okay, either it is so nuanced that I can go straight into a shoulder in, a dressage movement, or maybe I can make a turn and leave the track and then my horse follows that. This doesn't actually matter from whatever position I'm working from. If I sit on the horse or if I walk backwards in front of the horse or if I'm on the side or wherever I am, this is something I put a lot of time into working. So if this doesn't work or if I want to dimmer it, then my secondary aids come into play. Make sense?
So you want to alter some tiny part of the movement. That's your dimmer part.
Yeah, or make flexion at the pole, the small dressage in the nuance movement. moving
a bit higher tension.
Yeah, exactly.
Which isn't, it's very different from stop, start, go, turn, sit down.
But I think the Nuance dog trainer can make their dog look fantastic. And when their dog is very rhythmical and has free shoulder movement, it looks absolutely amazing from a dressage sense, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think this, for me as an agility trainer, and the handling system idea or concept is very similar in that we are constantly cueing. And if we take that a bit wider, the environment is constantly cueing the learner. And there are some cueing systems, some aspects of this cueing that are like constant, they're there all the time. And then this little thing happened, and that alters the cueing function, that alters the behavior. So it is, from a behavioral standpoint, it's the observation that if the learner learns some system of how the world works, that tends to be helpful for us to predict behavior and for the learner to predict what will happen next. And then we can add more and more small nuances on top of that and get reasonably predictable outcome for everybody involved.
Yeah, and I think that we actually have been quite all right with knowing this for a lot of time with horses. We teach the canter in the same corner, but then the next step often is, because when the horse learns the exercise, we take that away from it often in traditional setting, because we don't want the horse to do the behavior before we have cued it, because we want high levels of obedience often in traditional training. I think the concept is known, but when we can use it to its fullest potential, I think that is how, when we're working a bit more open and with reward-based techniques that actually asks our horse to be a stronger part of our training, also that's when this start to really, really shine. And when we can get horses that are so savvy in the behavior that are doing, and really, we often say that clicker horses pushes their criteria. And that's how our horses helps us, or the ideas that horses come with. I think those are very, very conceptual in where we teach things and what we do here. And that will, of course, when you're a handy trainer, you can use that to create new fun behaviors as well. But I think that's, from a welfare point of view, which was probably more you're in there, but also to create movement that the horse will actually appreciate and that will create a physically strong learner in the long run. I love that.
Oh, there are some juicy things in here when it comes to what is cueing the behavior, like what are the contingencies that are present in terms of making sure that we as trainers are not the only source of information or access to reinforcement. Because if we are, then we have to take 100% of the responsibility for checking in with how the learner is perceiving their own bodies and their environment all the time. There's no way we can do that. So to ensure welfare and well-being, but also to ensure getting the type of movements or whatever that we're looking for, we want to have wide enough cueing systems, in a sense. I'm not sure if that is the right way of expressing it, but to make sure that there is enough room and enough reinforcement history for our learner to shift movement to something that is more comfortable for them, or to move around something rather than through it, or to leave us rather than stay with us. Those are such important parts of our cueing systems and this goes back to us discussing movement and dressage movements and husbandry, bouncing that back and forth, of having all these nuances and having all those cueing systems, but not in order to lock the learner into what we are thinking of, but to actually open up for them to be reasonably autonomous parties.
Yeah, and I think this can sound like we have zero precision in our training, but I find it's quite the opposite. This is the way for me to get to high precision movement, because this can sound very loosey, like we do whatever, but really we don't. But I mean, what you're actually also saying, I think that's so important to how we approach training, because this is giving us the out. This is giving us the out. Not only it gives the horse an out, it gives us an out too. Because if we need to be perfect all the time to be able to go out and train with our learner, that's not really realistic, or in most scenarios not even reinforcing, because it's too high demands of it. And I mean, looking at the rest of the world and every task we have to do, I mean, it's not creating good expectation of training. So for that sake, also a very good idea to invest.
You have a brilliant word that you use, which is exit point.
Yeah.
Which is like a really simple version of what we're talking about right now. Just ensuring that there is learning history for leaving the task at hand without necessarily running a kilometer away, but that there is an established way. And I mean, I think a lot of us are familiar with that from for example, husbandry training setup. But to have that idea through and through in our training, and like how if something is uncomfortable or seems dangerous or whatever, what are the other behaviors that my learner can engage in that situation, and how do we make sure that there is reinforcement history for that? And that's like for you building the low frustration horse. I think that's also where this whole exit point idea comes in, which I think for everybody in listening to this podcast who gets anywhere near an animal that might exhibit behaviors that you would label as frustration, in order to get the next reinforcer from you, learning from Angelica in using exit strategies for the learner. Like if you don't understand the task, rather than spinning and barking or biting the pocket, just exit. Stop, put your head down.
Look for reinforcers in the environment.
Go find some
please.
food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that creates such a different mindset in our horses, and creates both a safe learner and a very relaxed learner that actually can reach that independent learner status that I so often talk about. But yeah.
Well done on passion talking, both of you. That was awesome. I think we can understand, as the listeners of this podcast, why your collaboration is called Exploring Nuances. It makes complete sense. You've got these online offerings that you've been doing, and more ones coming up. Who, as the listeners of the show, who is the Exploring Nuances content for? Is it for dressage trainers, husbandry-focused trainers? Is it for more experienced trainers, green trainers? Is it for everyone? Who are you aiming to connect with what you guys are putting out?
So I'd say the material that you are doing, Angelica, is typically for trainers who are reasonably experienced in positive reinforcement training and sort of enjoys the geekiness and the diving into details. I think that is what we've seen. But then it is since it's like we're doing a lot of pretty basic behaviors. It's not. So we also have quite a few two very newer, less experienced participants who have been doing amazingly well.
I think we're talking about a bit of different categories, because for the precision movements, the direction movements that we can create that are very, very nuanced and very delicate in some sense, that's maybe for the it's definitely for the more experienced trainer, but also for the more nerdy movement explorer. But the independent eating, the pause, to creating a horse that is fine, just be. Is that how you say it, Eva? Just be around, hang around with you in the riding arena. I mean, that is for everyone. And I think that's for me, it's maybe the best gift with all this exploring that we actually have labeled it and structured it to be able to use it before the horse actually has a trained behavior repertoire. We don't need any behavior to calm a horse down in this sense. We can just feed the horse and create a learner that is happy to be with us in the environment without trained behaviors to do so. Yeah.
And that means that in this material, we really enjoyed doing online course on Exploring Rewards with a wide range of trainers and horses in it, because I'm going to quote, I think it comes from Ken Romero's advanced training is the basics done really well. And I think that doing the basics is what we're doing. We are digging at the basics, but we're digging at the basics at a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
So it's positive reinforcement training through and through, and it's looking for the best interest of the learner, while also a bit geeky on the behavior side.
Totally focusing on very, very clean loops, I would say, as well, which is, of course, contributing to a relaxation part of it.
I would also really like to encourage the dog trainers or trainers of other species to dig into this a little bit. I mean, both that Exploring Nuances webinar where we discussed movement and dressage and husbandry, which is like the concept there is definitely easily relatable for any trainer. But I'm thinking, just like you have been doing as a horse trainer, coming in and listening to dog training webinars and reading the agility book and like digging into the dog training and taking concepts that make sense to you, making you an even better horse trainer. That's something I would like to encourage just in general, not just when it comes to our material, but to all material, to not stop with what's closest to you.
Yeah, I'm really studying your agility book. I must say, I've been one of my greatest changer in the terms of books that I ever had. I mean, of course, I've also been teaching with Morten from Canis as a, well, I tried to join with a horse, but he said no. But I joined as an auditor in his course also, to watch a lot of dog training for, I don't know, I think this is the third year in a row. So I think I agree with you, Eva. I totally encourage people to look into dog training, because you guys have more experience in many different behaviors, especially the husband. I think that part is so interesting. And I think it's you're working much more hands-off, which we have so much to learn from. I think that's beautiful how nuanced, if we are into that, how nuanced the behaviors you can get in your husbandry. I think that has been one of the most beautiful things that I'm taking away from last summer.
Awesome. And we're coming towards the end, but just share with everyone the upcoming learning opportunities you are going to be making available for everyone. And I think you've discussed, or you've not discussed, but you've mentioned the terms. You've definitely discussed within the Animal Training Academy membership terms like continuous feeding and independent feeding. You mentioned them on the podcast episode today, but maybe help for those listening understand what these terms are and some of the things they're going to learn if they take you up on your future learning opportunities.
Yeah, super cool. Thanks, Ryan. Yes, we've done the online course of Exploring Rewards, where we started working from sort of non-training, just hanging out, horse just hanging out independently of trainer, working with independent eating, looking at start and exit strategies, developing hand feeding, and then going all the way to continuous feeding with detailed movements in stillness and in motion. So when we did this as an online course, we sort of packed it all into this one course, which was intense. So what we're looking to do now is to sort of split it up a bit and offer freestanding webinars and also potentially shorter chunks of workshops or mini courses, so that you can, I think our participants from the rounds that we did with that course will agree with us that it can be helpful for our future participants to get it a little bit more bite-sized. So that's the plan. And then we also have the Exploring Nuances webinar available, the recording of that, since we're like ridiculously happy about it, although we haven't done an in-depth course or anything on that, but it's a pretty information-packed and nuance-packed webinar.
Cool. And we've linked to it in part 1, but can you remind people where they can go online to find out more?
So I think by the time this podcast is released, there might be 2 different pathways to find our material. The one that's already existing is, Angelica, say it correctly, please, your website.
rewardbasedartofwriting.com, the longest name in history.
And then you add /exploring nuances to that, and you get
just
directly
click
to
away.
our stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, you can find what's on offer in my web shop as well. So by the time this podcast is released, you will for sure find a lecture or a workshop there.
And I am, with some good help, doing the final touches on a new website, because I apparently need one where all my collaborations can be found, because it's impossible for anybody to find all the things I'm doing. I mean, Emily and I are good at having our carp momentum stuff, but then I work in 1,000 different collaborations and it's a bit hard to find. So it will be evabertilsson.com, or you can click in and find everything, links to everything. It's not published yet, but by the time this podcast is released, then maybe it will be open.
Awesome.
Looking good.
And you're lucky you got evabertilsson.com. I went to get ryancartledge.com, but Ryan Cartledge of Canada already claimed it. So I had to get ryancartledge.net. I know, but he's doing some cool... He's a filmmaker and he's doing cool things. And he's got an awesome name, so I forgive him.
That's like the photographer who got... That's like the photographer who got carpemomentum.com before Emily and I could get it way back. I know, and it's like, of course a photographer got Carpe Momentum.
Well, the photographers might...
So we got .se and .nu. They steal our stuff.
Animal trainers versus photographers. Hey, we always like to end these episodes with a look into the future. Eva, we've asked you this question before, and I'm curious for your input on this to know what you think about how far we've come over the last 5 years. But Angelica, you've been working in the horse industry for a significant amount of time now, and you've spent time in lots of different pieces of the pie of that industry. Where do you see everything going over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you want to see happen moving forward in the horse training world?
Well, first things first, I do want our reward-based training, dialects, whatever it looks like, to become more mainstream. Of course, that's the top of my list, I think. Yeah, for sure. I'm at the personal level, what I'm doing myself, interested in exploring my dressage techniques and talk with other trainers, network a bit around the dressage training. That's in it for me. But in the horse world at large, I think I have seen the last decade. I mean, it's so much changes, and I welfare is becoming, we have a long way to go, but from what I've seen over the last 5 years, I think we're taking huge leaps. I feel very positive to how horse training, animal training is changing from where I look. And for me, mainstream, and to how to ask oneself how we can bring more people, what's the right way of approaching some people and change them. How can we do that? That's the main part for me, I think.
I think we just follow Eva and Angelica's lead in terms of what you guys are bringing and what you've shared in these last 2 episodes about collaboration and networking, and there being no right or wrong. But you said earlier that curiosity wasn't the right word. For me, it is. That's the label that I resonate with when I'm listening to you guys talk over the last 2 episodes. Eva, we asked you this question roughly 5 years ago. I'd actually need to go back and listen to what you said 5 years ago. But how far do you think we've come since 2017?
I think we've come a long way. And for me personally, this collaboration with Angelica and others, like the explorations of nuances in what we do is an example of how far we've come, at least from my personal horizon. I think we've come a long way in more people being able to talk about observables, not only behavior. more people are familiar with the vocabulary we can use, which makes it easier to quickly describe what we're talking about and to not have to take the longer route always when discussing something. We can quite quickly be okay with let's ditch the labels when we can, or let's have a common understanding that a word for something doesn't equivalent that thing. And we also have, I think, a huge increase in building on autonomy for our learners, and more welfare focus. And I know I wished for that 5 years ago, and I definitely think we're moving well in that direction.
Would you say the cultural fog has become less foggy?
It's changed its shapes, at least. I think we have, depending on like which aspect of humanity we're talking about. I mean, for us in the Animal Training Academy subgroup of humanity, I think, we're less foggy. But I mean, looking at how we talk about life and behavior at large in society, my answer would be I don't know. I think it's changing continuously, but I think I wouldn't be so brave as to say we have less cultural fog.
I like to hope that if the Animal Training Academy and animal training community is becoming less foggy, the ripples from that are...
That is a good point. That is a very good point.
Rippling. Hey, this has been so much fun from myself and on behalf of everyone listening. Eva and Angelica, we really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behaviour geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.